What would you do if a man in a lab coat told you to hurt someone and said it was okay because it was just an experiment? What if I told you that under the right pressure, the right moment, even the kindest person could pull the trigger? And what if the real horror isn't what others are capable of, but what might live quietly inside you? Imagine this. You're just an ordinary person. You have a family, dreams, and a sense of right and wrong that guides your daily choices. But one day, you find yourself standing in a cold, clinical room. A stranger sits bound to a chair in front of you. Their eyes plead with yours. A man in a white lab coat looks at you and calmly instructs, "Press the button." It's just an experiment, he assures you. The moment you press it, the person in the chair jolts. Electricity surges. Through their body they flinch, they scream, you hesitate. The man insists, "Keep going. Now pause, just for a second." What would you do? This isn't fiction. It's one of the most unsettling psychological studies in modern history, the Milgram experiment. In that experiment, ordinary people, teachers, office clerks, fathers, mothers, were told to administer what they believed were lethal electric shocks to complete strangers. And here's the shocking part. Over 65% obeyed. They continued pressing the button, even when the person on the other side was begging them to stop. But that was just an experiment. What happens when blind obedience unfolds in the real world? Let's rewind to 1944. A quiet town in Europe. A soldier, once a kind, soft-spoken family man, is handed an order. In front of him stand unarmed civilians. His hands tremble. He hesitates. The faces before him are terrified. Then a voice, "Do your duty." And he pulls the trigger. That man, he wasn't a monster. He was just like you, just like me. So, how does a good person become capable of something so horrifying? We like to believe that only bad people commit evil acts, that only the heartless, the psychopaths, the morally broken could ever harm another human being. But what if the real danger isn't out there? What if it's within, because psychology has shown us over and over again that under the right conditions, anyone is capable of doing the unthinkable. And that's what makes human nature so terrifying. Not that evil exists, but that it exists in all of us. History doesn't lie. The Holocaust, the Rwandan genocide, Abu Ghraib. Time and time again, ordinary people, mothers, neighbors, teachers, become the perpetrators of unimaginable cruelty, not because they were born evil, but because something inside them shifted. It begins with something you'd hardly notice, not a scream, not a gunshot, but a whisper, a thought that says, "It's just this once." Because the truth is, people don't wake up one day and decide to become monsters. There's no dramatic moment, no sudden transformation. There's a process, a hidden one. And that's what makes it so dangerous. It works in silence. It operates through small compromises that feel harmless. It twists your perception, weakens your boundaries, and makes you believe you're still a good person. Even as you cross lines you once thought were unthinkable, you don't even realize it's happening until it's too late. And that's the most terrifying part. This descent isn't obvious. It's slow, it's subtle. It begins with a minor decision, something that feels like no big deal. A little obedience, a bit of rationalization. You justify it. You tell yourself it's fine. But over time, those small steps accumulate. And suddenly you're standing in a place you once swore you'd never go. This isn't just a story from history books, it's a warning. Because this transformation, it's happening right now, in offices, in online comment sections, in politics, in everyday conversations. And if you don't know what to look for, if you don't recognize the signs, you won't even see yourself slipping into it until you already have. But here's the good news. Once you understand the mechanism behind it, you can stop it. You can protect yourself. Because if there's one thing history has taught us, it's this. The moment you think, "I would never do that," is the exact moment you're most vulnerable. So what exactly is this hidden transformation? It's called the corruption cycle, a 5-stage psychological process that turns good people into willing participants in darkness. It's not random. It's not chaotic. It follows a predictable pattern, and it always begins at the same place. Stage 1. Moral erosion. The first step, the smallest crack in the foundation. No one leaps into evil. No one wakes up and decides to betray their own values. It always begins with something that feels minor, a harmless lie, a quiet betrayal, a gentle bending of your personal code. But here's the trap. Each small violation lowers the threshold for the next. What was once unthinkable gradually becomes tolerable, and then normal. Your internal compass doesn't snap in half all at once. It drifts, slowly, degree by degree, until north is no longer north, and you don't even know you're lost. Stage 2. Obedience to authority. The illusion of duty. Here's a chilling truth. Ordinary people will commit extraordinary harm, simply because an authority figure told them to. We like to believe we're immune to this, that we would never blindly follow orders if it meant hurting someone else. But history and psychology say otherwise. Take the infamous Milgram experiment. In a quiet lab room, participants were instructed to deliver what they believed were increasingly dangerous electric shocks to a stranger. The stranger screamed, begged, eventually fell silent. But the participants kept pressing the button because a man in a lab coat said, "The experiment requires that you continue." Over 65% obeyed, to the very end. And that was just an experiment. In the real world, this obedience plays out in far darker ways. Soldiers following unethical orders in war. Employees carrying out corrupt policies in corporations. Citizens enforcing unjust laws, not because they believe in them, but because they're told, "This is your job." And that's the danger. When we obey without question, we offload our responsibility. We trade our moral compass for the comfort of following directions, and evil thrives, hidden beneath the disguise of duty. Stage 3. The power of group identity, the us versus them. Trap humans are social creatures. We're wired to seek belonging, to find safety in groups. But that same instinct that builds community can also be weaponized to destroy it. When we identify as part of a group, we automatically create an other, and once someone is labeled as not us, something terrifying begins to unfold. We start to see them as different, then as less than, and eventually as not human at all. History proves it again and again. When they are stripped of their humanity in the minds of us, atrocities become justifiable. Stage 4. Self-justification and moral licensing. The mind's trickery. No one wants to believe they're the villain. So when people are forced to face actions that contradict their values, the mind does something subtle but dangerous. It rewrites the story. I had no choice. I was just doing what needed to be done. It was for the greater good. These are the lines that echo throughout history's darkest chapters. But here's the truly frightening part. We all do this. Every time we excuse a wrong action because we believe we're a good person, we step deeper into the cycle. Every justification chips away at accountability. And once the mind begins rewriting morality, it rarely stops. Stage 5. Dehumanization, the point of no return. This is it, the final, irreversible step, when an individual or a society fully strips humanity from another person or group. There is nothing left to stop cruelty. Once someone is no longer seen as human, morality no longer applies. This is how genocides happen, how oppressive regimes justify torture, how online hate becomes real-world violence. It is the moment when empathy dies and monsters are born. Understanding the corruption cycle is the first step toward breaking free from it. But to truly resist it, we need to examine each stage up close, starting with the one that hides in plain sight, moral erosion. Because here's the truth. Evil doesn't burst through the door with fanfare and flames. It slips in quietly, through the cracks of small choices. No one wakes up and says, "Today I will abandon my values." It doesn't work that way. The descent into darkness isn't a dramatic plunge. It's a slow, nearly invisible slide. It begins with something that feels harmless. A tiny compromise, a white lie, a silent moment when you don't speak up after witnessing something wrong. Maybe it's bending a rule to help a friend, or choosing convenience over conscience just this once. And because nothing terrible happens right away, your brain learns something dangerous. This isn't so bad. Our minds are wired to protect us from guilt. So when our actions clash with our values, we experience a kind of internal tension, what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. And instead of facing that discomfort head-on, the brain takes a shortcut. It rewrites reality. Everyone does it. It's not a big deal. It's just a one-time thing. These rationalizations smooth over the conflict. But here's the problem. Every time we justify a small wrong, we lower the bar. The next compromise gets easier, and the one after that, even easier still. With each step, guilt fades, and what once seemed unthinkable begins to feel normal. A single unethical act might feel insignificant, but it's rarely just one, because once someone crosses the first moral boundary, the next one comes faster. The threshold for what's acceptable keeps expanding. History gives us countless examples of this effect in action. Take the Watergate scandal, for instance. What began as a relatively minor political scheme, spying on opponents, quickly spiraled into a full-blown conspiracy. At every step, someone could have stopped. But each small compromise made the next one seem justified. By the time the truth came out, the damage was irreversible. Many of history's darkest chapters didn't begin with overt cruelty. They began in quiet boardrooms, in command centers, in moments of just doing my job. Take corporate fraud, for example. Major scandals like Enron didn't explode out of nowhere. They began with small financial manipulations. A number tweaked here, a report delayed there. Tiny, justifiable actions. But over time, those small adjustments grew into massive, systemic fraud, costing lives, livelihoods, and entire economies. And the same is true in far more horrifying contexts. War crimes, genocides, ethnic cleansing. Some of the most inhumane acts in recorded history were committed not by monsters, but by people who started with small, seemingly harmless orders. Follow this rule. Don't ask questions. Just file the report. Just turn away. Until one day, they found themselves deeply complicit in horrors they never imagined. Psychologists have studied this chilling effect for decades. It's called the foot in the door phenomenon. The idea is simple. If you agree to something small, even slightly unethical, you become far more likely to comply with a larger request later on. And then a larger one, and a larger one still. Authoritarian regimes know this. Manipulative leaders know this. Even toxic workplace managers use it. Because once you've taken the first step, the next feels easier. The path is no longer a leap, it's a gentle slope. And here's the most dangerous lie of all. I would never do that. Most people believe they're immune. They look at criminals, corrupt leaders, historical atrocities, and they say, I could never become one of them. But the truth is, no one ever thinks they're capable of evil until it's too late. This isn't about being a bad person. It's about failing to notice the first step. And once that line is crossed, the descent becomes disturbingly easy. Stage 6. Obedience to authority. When just doing my job becomes dangerous. In the early 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted what would become one of the most disturbing and eye-opening experiments in the history of psychology. Participants, ordinary, men and women, were told they were helping in a learning experiment. Their job? Administer electric shocks to a learner in another room every time that person answered a question incorrectly. With each wrong answer, the voltage increased. The learner, who was actually an actor, screamed in pain, begged for mercy, pleaded for the experiment to stop. Eventually, they fell completely silent, implying they had passed out or worse. And still, the participants kept going. Why? Because a man in a white lab coat, a figure of authority, calmly repeated, "The experiment requires that you continue." An astounding 65% of participants delivered shocks up to the maximum 450 volts, despite believing they were seriously harming, or even killing, another human being. They weren't evil. They weren't monsters. They were just doing their job. Milgram's experiment wasn't just a psychological test, it was a window into history. The same excuse, "I was just following orders," has echoed through some of humanity's darkest chapters. Nazi officers, concentration camp guards, many of them weren't inherently sadistic. They were ordinary men who had surrendered their morality to a commanding voice. In 1968, during the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, US soldiers killed over 500 innocent civilians, including women and children. Why? Because they were told to. It's not just on battlefields. In the world of corporate corruption, many financial crimes are not masterminded by villains in boardrooms, but carried out by regular employees. They follow unethical instructions from superiors, assuming it's not my responsibility. But that belief, that obedience removes accountability, is the most dangerous psychological trap of all. Another chilling study came in 1971 with psychologist Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. College students were randomly assigned roles, guards, and prisoners. It was supposed to be a harmless simulation, just role play. But within days, the students playing guards became cruel and abusive, humiliating prisoners, enforcing punishments, losing touch with reality. The line between role and identity blurred. They didn't need orders. They had internalized their authority. The experiment had to be shut down early. Zimbardo later explained, "Most of us can undergo significant character transformations when caught up in the crucible of social forces. The most disturbing takeaway from all of these studies? It's not just that people follow harmful orders. It's that they genuinely believe they never would. Ask anyone, would you have shocked the learner? Would you have become the abusive prison guard? They'll say, never. But every single participant in those experiments thought the same thing before they pushed the button, before they gave the order. Obedience isn't about being evil. It's about social conditioning. From childhood, we are taught to respect and submit to authority, teachers, bosses, police, governments, and that conditioning runs deep. So when a command comes from someone in power, our first instinct isn't resistance, it's compliance. And that's how good people do terrible things. Not because they're bad, but because they don't question the orders they're given. Stage 7. The power of group identity. The us versus them. Trap as humans. We're wired for connection. We crave belonging, whether it's in families, friendships, sports teams, political parties, or nations. Our sense of identity is deeply tied to the groups we belong to. But this instinct, as natural and comforting as it is, has a dark side. Because the same wiring that binds us to our people can turn us against everyone else. The moment we start thinking in terms of us and them, something dangerous happens. Morality begins to fade. Compassion weakens. And those outside our group slowly stop being seen as fully human. Psychologists have studied this for decades. One famous example is Henry Tajfel's minimal group experiments. Researchers randomly assigned people into completely arbitrary groups, sometimes just by flipping a coin. And yet, people consistently favored members of their own group. They gave them more rewards, more sympathy, even when there was no meaningful difference between groups. Worse, they were willing to disadvantage or harm the other group, even if it brought them no personal benefit. If people are willing to discriminate against others based on nothing but a coin toss, imagine how powerful this effect becomes when race, religion, nationality, or ideology enter the equation. This is why we justify cruelty, so long as it's against the enemy. Because in our minds, the moment someone stops being one of us, they start to become something less. This is the psychological shift that has fueled wars, genocides, and mass oppression throughout human history, and it always begins the same way: dehumanization. It's a psychological process, one that strips people of their individuality, one that makes cruelty feel justified, because it no longer feels like we're hurting people. Let's look at the pattern. Nazi propaganda labeled Jewish people as rats. In Rwanda, Hutus called Tutsis cockroaches. During slavery, African people were described as savages, beasts, property. This kind of language isn't random. It's deliberate. Because once someone is no longer seen as human, they're easier to hurt. We stop seeing individuals with names, families, and feelings, and start seeing faceless enemies. Groups to be punished, removed, or erased. And by the time violence begins, the psychological groundwork has already been set in stone. The horror isn't new. It's simply been unleashed. The most terrifying part, these atrocities aren't carried out by monsters hiding in the shadows. They're carried out by ordinary people, neighbors, teachers, shopkeepers, soldiers, people who once loved, people who once hesitated. The Holocaust wasn't driven by a few sadistic leaders. It was supported, quietly, passively, and sometimes actively, by millions of ordinary German citizens. Most weren't inherently cruel. They simply stopped seeing their victims as fully human. The Holocaust wasn't carried out solely by ideological zealots. The Rwandan genocide in 1994 wasn't led only by soldiers. It was ordinary citizens, neighbors, people who once shared meals, streets, and smiles, turned against each other by propaganda. In just 100 days, over 800,000 people were massacred. Not by strangers, by people they knew. Why? Because the narrative told them they weren't killing humans. They were eliminating cockroaches. The same terrifying truth surfaced in Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. In a simulated environment, everyday college students were assigned the roles of guards and prisoners. No real power, no real threat, just a label. And yet, within days, the students playing guards became abusive. They humiliated, dominated, and dehumanized their peers. They didn't need to be trained. They just needed a role, and the belief that they were different from us. This isn't ancient history. You don't need to look far to see this same dynamic at play. It's happening right now, on social media, in comment sections, in political discourse. People are no longer seen as individuals with different views. They are labeled traitors, idiots, evil. Outrage is manufactured. Algorithms feed us division. The goal? Keep us in a constant state of us versus them. This is modern dehumanization. And like in history, it starts small, a meme, a headline, a tweet calling the other side parasites, a casual comment. They're all the same. But it doesn't stop there. It escalates. Online harassment, cancel culture, mobs fueled by moral outrage, shaming, silencing, and sometimes even destroying real lives. And just like before, empathy disappears the moment someone is labeled the enemy. So how do we break free? How do we resist this deeply rooted psychological trap? It starts with recognition. The moment you catch yourself thinking of an entire group as the problem, stop. Ask yourself, who benefits from this division? Who's telling me to see them this way? See individuals, not labels. No group is a monolith. Not all men, not all women, not all conservatives, not all liberals, not all anything. Engage with real people, not stereotypes. Resist the pull of propaganda, whether it comes from politicians, media, or your own social circle. Stay alert to language that paints entire groups as dangerous, stupid, or less than human, because history has shown us one undeniable truth. The moment we stop seeing each other as human, we become capable of anything. And here's where it gets even darker. No one thinks of themselves as the villain. Even history's worst criminals believed they were acting for a noble cause. That's the terrifying power of the next stage in the cycle. Self-justification, the mental trick that allows people to commit harm while still believing they're good. Stage 8. Self-justification and moral licensing. When good intentions excuse terrible acts, one of the most dangerous forces in human psychology is the belief that we are the good guys. Because when people believe their cause is righteous, they give themselves permission to commit the unthinkable. Throughout history, some of the worst atrocities weren't committed by people acting out of hatred. They were committed by people who believed they were acting out of duty, morality, or even love. Think about it. Religious wars have slaughtered millions, all in the name of defending holy truth. Political purges have been justified as cleansing society of evil. Censorship and oppression have been framed as protecting the people. This is why ideologies, whether political, religious, or social, can become so dangerous. When people believe their mission is sacred, they stop questioning their own behavior. They rewrite reality to fit the narrative. Dictators silence opposition and call it protection. Corrupt leaders hoard wealth and call it earned. Military officials commit atrocities and call it necessary security. And here's the scariest part.
They believe it. Self-justification is so powerful, it convinces people they're heroes while they're doing harm. But it's not just those in power. We all do this. A student cheats on a test and says, "I studied hard, I deserve this."
A coworker mistreats someone and thinks they had it coming. A driver runs a red light and shrugs. Everyone does it. Each small justification pushes us further down a slippery slope. Over time, what once felt wrong begins to feel normal. And the moment someone says, "I had no choice. It was for the greater good," They've already stepped into dangerous territory. So how do we resist this invisible descent? Start with discomfort. That uneasy feeling when you're about to do something that doesn't sit right. That's your signal. Pause. Ask yourself, am I making excuses? Would I accept this behavior from someone else? Hold yourself accountable. The most dangerous lies aren't the ones we tell others. They're the ones we tell ourselves. Don't fall for moral licensing. Just because you've done something good doesn't mean you now have permission to do harm. And most importantly, surround yourself with people who challenge you. Avoid echo chambers. Seek out voices that make you rethink, reflect, and reevaluate your choices. Because here's the cold truth. The road to becoming a monster rarely starts with evil intentions. It starts with a single moment of self-deception, a single sentence. This is fine. Every atrocity in history, every mass injustice contains this moment. The moment when what was once unthinkable becomes justified. When people stop seeing their victims as fellow human beings. That's the final, most devastating stage in the descent. Dehumanization. Stage 9. Dehumanization. The point of no return. Empathy is one of the strongest human instincts we possess. When we see someone in pain, our brain reacts. We feel discomfort. Our mirror neurons activate. We recognize their suffering as something familiar, something that could be our own. But here's the terrifying loophole. If we stop perceiving someone as fully human, that empathy vanishes. Throughout history, this single psychological trick has paved the way for unspeakable atrocities. It's the mental switch that allows ordinary people to commit extraordinary evil. During the Rwandan genocide, radio broadcasts repeatedly referred to Tutsi people as cockroaches. In Nazi Germany, Jewish people were called rats. During American slavery, black people weren't even referred to as people. They were described as property. The pattern is disturbingly consistent. Before violence erupts, there is always a linguistic campaign. Words are chosen carefully, not to inform, but to strip away humanity. And once someone becomes an object instead of a person, hurting them no longer feels wrong. That's the essence of dehumanization. But don't think this is just a history lesson. It's not locked away in textbooks. Dehumanization is happening right now, in wars, in politics, and especially online. Governments and propaganda machines paint their enemies as monsters to justify violence. Soldiers are trained to call people targets, not humans. Civil wars begin when neighbors no longer see neighbors, but enemies at the gate. And on social media, the process is even more subtle and even more widespread. We throw insults at strangers we've never met. We type without thinking, attacking with language we'd never use face to face. Because we don't see their faces. We don't hear their voices. And without that human connection, cruelty becomes effortless. Political debates become wars. Opponents are not just wrong, they're evil. Mob mentality takes over. Cancel culture, harassment, and sometimes even real-world violence. Each of these forces slowly reprograms the brain, training us to view others as objects, as something less than human. And here's the most dangerous truth. Once that mental switch is flipped, there's no limit to what a person can justify. Dehumanization doesn't just make people tolerate cruelty. It makes them participate in it. Once someone genuinely believes another human being isn't fully human, there's no moral boundary left to stop them. And that's why history's worst atrocities were not committed by monsters. They were committed by ordinary people, mothers, fathers, neighbors, people who had simply been led to believe. Their victims deserved it, and once someone crosses that line, once they've committed their first act of cruelty, The next time is easier. And the time after that, even easier still. That's when the descent is complete. So how do we resist something so subtle, so psychologically powerful? We start by becoming radically aware. Anytime you hear a group being called vermin, parasites, savages, alarm bells should go off. These are not just words, they are warning signs. Stop. Ask yourself, am I seeing a person or just a label? What do I really know about them? See individuals, not categories. Refuse to participate in online hate mobs. Social media may reward outrage, but it also trains us to see others as disposable. Remember this, empathy is a choice, and it's one you must make consciously. Every person you meet, yes, even the ones you disagree with, has thoughts, dreams, fears, and pain, just like you. Because once dehumanization takes hold, there's no going back. Here's the chilling truth. The descent into darkness isn't some rare psychological anomaly. It doesn't only happen to bad people or in extreme times. It's not some glitch reserved for history's worst villains. It's wired into the human brain. At the heart of every stage in the corruption cycle, every moral compromise, every blind command, every act of cruelty, lies a single primal instinct: survival. We are creatures evolved to protect ourselves, to belong, to defend what's ours. And that instinct, as ancient as humanity itself, has shaped the way we think, even when it costs others their dignity, their rights, or their lives. Let's look again through that lens. Moral erosion is a defense mechanism. Your brain rewrites reality to protect you from guilt. Obedience to authority was once a survival strategy. For most of history, following the leader meant safety. Group identity and tribalism. It's hardwired. Being part of a united group once meant protection from threats. Self-justification helps you stay mentally stable in the face of contradiction, and dehumanization, as horrifying as it sounds, is a survival shortcut. When someone seems like a threat, your brain suppresses empathy to remove hesitation. These mechanisms weren't designed to be evil. They evolved to help humans navigate a dangerous world. But in the modern era, they're often hijacked by ideologies, by systems, by algorithms, by fear. That's why history keeps repeating. That's why ordinary people keep making the same mistakes, because these instincts aren't just around us, they're within us. So what does that mean? Are we doomed to repeat the cycle? No. But resisting, it requires something that doesn't come naturally. Radical self-awareness. The moment you say, "I would never do something like that," that's when you're most vulnerable. The only true defense is to recognize your own capacity for darkness. To see that you are just as human and just as fallible as anyone else. So how do we break free? It starts with conscious moral reflection. Because morality isn't just about following rules. It's about questioning your thoughts, your choices, your beliefs, especially when they feel easy. Pause every time you feel the need to justify a questionable act. Challenge your instinct to blindly obey. Notice when you start labeling a whole group as other. Interrupt the urge to follow the crowd, especially when that crowd is fueled by outrage. Ask yourself, am I being manipulated by my own instincts? Am I choosing the easier path or the right one? And here's the most powerful antidote of all: radical empathy. See the humanity in everyone, even those you disagree with, even those you fear. Because the line between good and evil, it's not drawn between countries or ideologies or religions. It runs straight through the human heart. And the most dangerous belief of all is this: I'm immune. The moment you think you're safe, you stop paying attention. And that's when the descent begins. But if these forces are built into us, how do we fight them every day? It takes practice. It takes courage. It takes moral vigilance. Reflect daily. Ask, if someone else did what I just did, would I still call them good? Question authority, even when it feels uncomfortable. Tear down the illusion of us versus them. Seek out people who challenge your thinking, not just echo it. Speak up, especially when no one else will, because the easiest way for evil to grow is for good people to stay silent.